Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your questions, hot takes, observations, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. You left them on my YouTube post in my Discord community. Link to that is in the description. And I pulled 26 of your comments. I will try to get to as many of them as possible over the course of the next hour. It is Thursday night as I'm recording this. The ATP Finals groups are out. And tomorrow, I will be recording an ATP Finals preview with a special guest. So this is a great week on the Gill Gross YouTube channel and the Monday Match Analysis podcast feed because we're doing 3 great shows as opposed to the regular 2. Look out for the ATP Finals preview coming out tomorrow. I also have one more announcement before I get into the comments. I'm doing a live video Q&A that will not get posted on YouTube. 2 Sundays from now, right after the finals end in Turin and a champion is crowned at the ATP Finals, I'll be doing a live Q&A exclusive to the Tribe community. What is Tribe? Tribe is an app that essentially is taking the good parts of social media and leaving behind the bad parts. We love social media because it gives us a broader community to share the things we're passionate about. But Tribe is creating a platform for us to do that in a far more intimate and carefully moderated setting. Think about it like a group chat, various group chats that you can join based on the niche subjects that you're interested in. So essentially, I have created a group chat within Tribe called Gill Gross Q&A, and the people who join that group will get access to a special link where I will do, again, my live Q&A session for 1 hour after the ATP Finals. So you can click the link in the description, gillgross.tribechat.com, download the Tribe app, search for tennis, join the Q&A with Gill Gross Tribe, and again, look out for the special link that will be posted in that group. All right. Let's do it. Questions. First one is from Dariku. Was there ever any talks of making the ATP Finals more versatile? Example, different surface/location each year? I don't see why the best 8 players, who all have different strengths and weaknesses and have excelled in different conditions, get to basically fight for the last title on one of the fastest courts in the same city every single year for about a decade or so. I feel like the ATP Finals has the potential to be huge. You can have different cities each year lining up to host the best 8 players and give different parts of the world a chance to see the top players in action. The hype built around it right now is just okay at best. All right, I see where you're coming from here. I do. If I'm playing devil's advocate, arguing against it, I would say it doesn't bother me that it's a fast indoor hard court because that to me actually does provide some equilibrium and some balance. If you look at the 4 majors, 2 on outdoor hard court, 1 on clay, 1 on grass, it kind of makes sense. All right, let's have our indoor championships, right? It in a way, and I know it's hard courts versus natural surfaces, it's still a little bit imbalanced where you have 3 hard courts, 1 clay, 1 grass. I get that part of it. But if you're we have 4 conditions in our sport, right? Outdoor hard, clay, grass, indoor hard. And with the ATP Finals being indoor hard, you kind of round it out and make it so that each condition has its big event. And of course, this one isn't as big as the slams, but you get my point. On the other hand, I see where you are coming from with this comment because you think about an event like the World Cup or an event like the Olympics, and obviously a considerable amount of flavor and hype, you could say, is added by the fact that the host venue changes each and every year. I don't know if that would be as seamless for the ATP Finals. Obviously, it's a smaller operation than the World Cup or the Olympics, but I do think it could add to it a little bit. I would say a good solution might be, why don't we change it up every 5 years to try to keep it fresh? And another thing that you could do is you could cater to the stars that you have in that particular moment. So like it works out right now because Italian tennis has had a renaissance. So you could have a home player in Jannik Sinner, a home player in Lorenzo Musetti. If Matteo Berrettini ever makes the top 8 again, you just have potential to have home players, which I think is always a value add for a tournament, so that you have that environment. And, I guess what I'm getting at is, how cool would it be for them to go to Serbia so Novak Djokovic can have kind of his home ATP Finals? Go to Germany so Zverev could have his home ATP Finals. The US, Australia, Canada would be really cool, if Felix got in. Now, you don't know who's going to get in, so that's obviously a huge issue, right? But, I think it always, to me, adds to the product when you can build your stars through putting them in their home environments. And I like that, the flexibility, if we're just spitballing on this. But yeah, I get asked this every year, actually. There are a lot of people who are like, why is the ATP Finals on indoor hard every year? But again, for the balance of the calendar, I don't hate it. And by the way, it does feel like the conditions are different. Where the US Open and the Australian Open, it's gotten to a point where it's pretty samey between those two events. But the ATP Finals is definitely a notch above those events in terms of speed. And honestly, it's a notch above almost everything on the tour. Turin, especially because Paris now isn't like it was last year, which was just a blip in the radar. Turin is really a serve-dominated event where you're getting tie breaks. Like, you're getting some old-school, quick, slick court tennis, to be honest. So it does feel a little bit fresh in that way. You've got some altitude there in addition to the court conditions. Next one is from R.S. Tucker, who is a member. You can become a member by hitting that join button and contributing $2 a month to the channel. It goes a long way. Much appreciated. Try to give you some priority in the mailbag. R.S. Tucker says, any thoughts on the Battle of the Sexes match between Sabalenka and Kyrgios? Does this help tennis at all, specifically women's tennis? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's going to help women's tennis. In fact, there are a lot of things that I'm kind of on the fence about when it comes to this event. One thing I'm not on the fence about is the idea that Sabalenka has signed herself up for what is essentially a can't-win match here. Given the state of Nick Kyrgios' career, I mean, is he really an active player at this point? His body has not been able to hold up. He has not been active by any stretch for the last, 2 full calendar years. And when he has taken the court, it's been a rough watch, to say the least. And then you throw in the fact that you're making Sabalenka's side of the court smaller. Some of you, I can't assume that everybody is up to speed with what's happening here. But basically, at the end of the year, Kyrgios and Sabalenka are going to play a match in, I forget where. Is it United Arab Emirates? Somewhere in the Middle East. I apologize. I don't remember the exact location. I think it's the UAE. I think it's Dubai. Anyway, they're going to play an exhibition match, 2 full sets, 3rd set tiebreak. But yeah, Sabalenka's side of the court, I believe, is going to be 8% smaller. I forget how much in inches exactly, but it's going to be 8% smaller. And then it's one serve each. So essentially you prevent Kyrgios from using his enormous nuclear first serve to sort of break open the match, which he would probably, he would have the ability to do. Essentially, I think you've positioned it so that if Sabalenka wins, especially given the way Kyrgios can go about things on his end sometimes, if Sabalenka wins, there are just so many avenues that have been left open for it to be discredited. If she loses, of course, it will be used as an opportunity for many to just bash the quality of women's tennis. So I really don't see an outcome that ends up being redeeming for Aryna Sabalenka. I don't really get it from her perspective. Although she does have at least the personality to kind of, I think, go about it the right way and take whatever happens in stride. I will say that. But on the Kyrgios end of things, well, I get it for him, right? I mean, he's been struggling for relevancy, and this is the kind of thing that is obviously going to command a lot of attention, and Kyrgios sort of deals in attention often. And I'm not saying that's even necessarily an indictment on him. Like, he takes a lot of pride in generating attention to the sport. He's constantly like touting how many people show up to watch his matches and how great for the sport he is. So like, this will give him ammo to continue to make that argument. And by the way, some of that argument on his end is he's got a lot of a leg to stand on, but at the same time, he is so unpopular among so many people. Lightning rod for attention? Yes, no doubt about it. Engages casual fans who sometimes don't pay any attention to tennis? Yes, absolutely. But among the tennis community, he's got an army of detractors. And I put out the question on social media when this news broke, and I just said, I tweeted this out. I said, thoughts? Like, I just wanted to know what people thought. And man, I went through it, and I actually got a little bit scientific about it and started doing a Rotten Tomatoes impersonation. And yeah, I was basically saying like, all right, if it's a negative comment, then I'll count it as rotten. And if it's a positive comment, I'll count it as, what is it? Ripe? Is that the opposite of ripe? Is that what they call it? I don't know. Anyway, 80% rotten. 80% rotten. Very, very unpopular among my social media followers, or at least the people whose feed it came up on. That's a pretty engaged, tennis liking / loving population. But this was very unpopular. And I do wonder, just for a hypothetical, let's say this was announced as Aryna Sabalenka versus Andy Murray, right? Somebody who is not widely disliked. I wonder how that reaction would have been different. I suspect it would have been somewhat different. I mean, at the end of the day, to include Nick Kyrgios in an event called Battle of the Sexes is a choice. I'll leave it at that, right? From Antony. Hi, Gill. Sinner won the coin toss against both Shelton and Felix and chose to receive, and it really paid dividends both times. What are all the possible elements players take into consideration when choosing to serve / receive, if given the option? Also, when is Gruskin coming on the show again? I'd love to see how your draft picks stack up after a year and what perspective is in terms of young and upcoming players for next year, maybe ahead of Jeddah. All the best. Yeah, we are planning on doing that very soon. So Gruskin will be on and we'll revisit our draft. Maybe we'll do some waiver wire ads. Who knows? All right, you're asking me about serve or receive coin toss. I love this topic. It's such a fascinating question because it's such a simple one. But there is no consensus in the wider tennis community on what the correct decision is. And listening to people's reasonings can be fascinating. I mean, I remember reading Brad Gilbert's book, Winning Ugly, when I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. Like, that book was in my hands really early. And he is an advocate of receiving due to the psychological advantage, and I'd say in some ways technical advantage, of having nothing to lose in the first game of the match. Being able to settle into a match in a scenario where either you break serve, okay, that's a bonus, that's big time, you're ahead, or you don't break serve, that's okay. I haven't lost anything here. So it's a no-lose situation, which is an ideal way to sort of start the match, where you could technically be a little nervous, not have the best feeling for the ball yet. And that does make a lot of sense to me. Jim Courier has talked about another reason for receiving, choosing to receive first. I love this one. Jim Courier says that you should receive, or he didn't say that you should receive. He said that he preferred to receive over the course of his career, because if you choose to receive, you end up playing your service games immediately after the changeover breaks, which means you are replenished both physically and mentally at the start of your service games. That makes a whole lot of sense to me. You're never going to start a service game tired or frustrated. So you have that time to reset. I love that reasoning. Then you have Novak Djokovic, who for the last 10 or so years in his career has chosen to serve first. And I'm going to quote him directly. He said, "I just feel that sets a tone in some way. You also send a message to your opponent like, hey, I'm not afraid to start serving. Start the match with this kind of a right statement. Sometimes I start slow, I lose my first service games, and then you start to question your decision making. But regardless of that, I still feel like it's important. It's important for you. It's important for your own confidence and to send the message to your opponent as well." So Novak essentially saying that in the psychological warfare of a tennis match, saying, give me those balls. I'm ready to serve right now. Let's go. That's a good message to send. I can't disagree with that. Abigail Johnson, who's a great commentator, been on the show before. We talk tennis all the time. She, I believe, would say, it's not a former pro perspective, so I know it's a little bit different than the ones that I just offered up. But she's a big believer in scoreboard pressure. Like, she believes that if you can avoid serving down 4-5 in a set where nobody's broken serve, that's a big bonus. And you do see that. Like, you do see the benefits of, if you get that early break, you're up 3-love. Is that better than 2-1? Of course it's better than 2-1 if you break, early. Would you rather be up 5-4 and up 6-5 or down 4-5 and down 5-6? Like, yeah, it does feel like there's some extra player on whoever chose to receive when you're on serve down the stretch of a set. So it's really, really interesting. Couple last things on this. ESPN's Simon Chambers did a great article and an analysis that was published this summer, and he looked at the Australian Open and Roland Garros and tracked what players were choosing to do on the tour. It turned out 67% of both men and women chose to receive at the Australian Open, and then very similar numbers at Roland Garros. But that was for the first round. As the tournament progressed, the numbers started to become much closer to 50-50 serve versus receive. Fascinating stuff. What is my opinion? My opinion, I'm sorry if this is kind of straddling the fence. My opinion is that you should play to your strength. If you consider yourself a server, you should serve first. Like, trust that part of your game, and that's how you're applying pressure on your opponent and sending, the message. I think if you can hold and you're confident in your serve game, serve first. If you're Alex de Minaur, if you're a serve breaker, if that's where you feel like you apply the most pressure, return first. That's where you impose yourself. That's where you make your opponents uncomfortable. Essentially, this is my overall theory. I think the first game of the match is very important as a tone setter. And whatever you feel more comfortable with setting the tone, that's what you should do. Daria Kasatkina should return, Iga Swiatek should probably receive. Like, go to your stronger side in that first game. That's my opinion. From Nathan, what do you like the most and dislike the most about the round-robin format at the year-end championships? The only thing I dislike about it is that you get dead rubbers. Other than that, I think it's a really fun and fair way to decide things. Sometimes the groups are very uneven, like this year, but I kind of like the game theory of it. I like the fact that we sort of have a different process pre-tournament of kind of digesting how things are going to go, and the matchups ahead of time. It's good for promotion. It's good to build up, I think, hype and anticipation. I really have no complaints. And do I dislike the fact that you can lose a match and still win the event? No, not really. I mean, that's all a part of it. So I think the format for the ATP Finals is pretty on point, if you ask me. All right, now this one is from the Discord, and the original comment is from Ariel or Reali. I don't know how to really pronounce it, but hi again, Gill. Always a pleasure to see your content. As an early and visceral lover of Alcaraz's game, I will always remember Sally Jenkins of Washington Post's evocative descriptions of him years ago, which someone paraphrased as, if you don't like watching Alcaraz, you don't like fun. But to achieve greater equilibrium about their rivalry, I would like to develop a more sophisticated understanding of what people like about Sinner's game, which I find very metronomic and tedious to watch. What about watching Sinner makes you marvel and enjoy it? So that was the original question, but I always hesitate to get into this topic at times. Like, I see myself as a food critic. So my job is to fully appreciate the many different ways different players go about things. Like, I literally see that as my duty. Or a music critic is the same thing. If you are a music critic, your job is to critique music. You have to meet the music where it is, right? You can't be a music reviewer or a critic and say, I didn't like that album because I don't like R&B. Didn't like that album because I hate folk music. That album I loved. I love hip hop. Like, that's not how it goes, right? You need to develop an appreciation for everything. And then once you kind of meet it where it's at, then you can decide the quality and evaluate it objectively. Food critics, same thing. You can't be, I didn't like that Thai restaurant, not a fan of Thai food. No, you're a horrible food critic, right? That's not the job. The job is to appreciate it, and then go from there, or appreciate at least the potential of it. And you know what I mean? So I really try to be an appreciator of many different things within tennis. Like, I'll give an example. John Isner, Giovanni Pecci Pericard, like serve bots. I really try to appreciate what they're doing, where a lot of tennis fans, and I'm not saying they should or have to, right? You can like what you like, but I think my job is to throw that kind of personal like stuff aside so that I can try to do my job as best I can. That said, like, I also do make an effort to try to understand these things. Like, why might one thing appeal more than another thing? It's not as if I'm completely blind to those factors. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But now, for that reason, because I try to shy away from this stuff, I wanted to include some responses in my Discord to this comment. Bob says, for me as a Sinner fan, it's the ball striking. Ever since I watched him for the first time when he won Montpellier in 2023, I've been enthralled by how perfectly he hits the ball off of both wings. And then Phoenix says, I more or less agree with Bob. He hits so cleanly and consistently, and his arm is so fluid while being incredibly controlled. Compare his mechanics to Sabalenka's to see what I mean. So much of what makes Sinner a top player comes down to his hitting consistently excellent shots. In this respect, he resembles Djokovic more so than he does Federer or Nadal. What he is doing on the court typically isn't as obviously impressive as what we see from Alcaraz. I do like that you brought up Djokovic here, because I think we've definitely had this conversation with Djokovic, and we could have had it for Andy Murray. Didn't as much, but could have. Where some of the things that they do, let's just keep it to Novak for now, like prime Djokovic, some of those things don't necessarily look cool. Consistency doesn't look cool. Depth doesn't look cool. Defense doesn't look as cool as attack. Just doesn't. Redundancy, like points looking the same a lot. There's definitely an entertainment value in variation that exists, but it's not always essential to success. And sometimes it comes at the cost of different things. So I want to move on. So let me just answer the question. Like when I'm watching Jannik Sinner, I am marveling at the level of aggression, the pace of shot combined with the cleanliness, right? Like that's what I'm sitting back and I am watching huge backhands, huge forehands come from all different areas of the court into very disciplined targets. And you have a combination of stingy, buttoned up tennis, but at the same time, like visceral, damaging tennis. And you have a marriage of those two things. And that is what I am appreciating generally when I'm watching Jannik Sinner. There are other things, obviously, but if I can sum it up, that's what I'm appreciating when I watch him. From 1K1. Hey, Gill, who do you think deserves more to play the ATP Finals between Auger-Aliassime and Musetti? I know it's weird to talk about deserving more in tennis, and ultimately the numbers don't lie, numbers meaning the race. But given the fact that Musetti was supposed to play the South American clay swing and got injured in his first match, and basically had to skip the whole grass season to recover from RG, I think there could be a fair conversation for both guys. Felix won more titles and has the great merit of stepping up when it counted in the last few tournaments to surpass Lorenzo, who on the other hand was extremely consistent on the clay, but fell off a bit in the last portion of the year. Ultimately, what is your take? Love the content as always. Love your question, so thank you. Well, here's where this is tough. When it comes to deserving of the ATP Finals, there are two things that come into play for me, personally. And this is, I think, a subjective kind of deal. The first thing is injuries. When a player gets hurt and still finds themselves on the cusp, I'm often thinking, man, that player deserves it, right? They're only in this position because they got hurt. So that aspect has been present in the past, and it definitely exists for Musetti, who, as you mentioned, couldn't play the grass lead-ins and was really compromised at Wimbledon also. Like, Basilashvili maybe could have beat him if he were healthy, but I don't think so. So, lost first round in Wimbledon. So couldn't do anything on the grass. And then you mentioned the injury in February as well. So that exists for Musetti. But the other thing, longtime viewers and listeners know that this is not me playing favorites at all. I always feel this way. I don't think the tournaments in February and October are as significant as the tournaments in the middle of the year. They're in parts of the calendar where you have more players locked in, dialed in, feeling as if, okay, this is an important time of the year. I'm gearing up for a major. And, you could say, well, Indian Wells and Miami isn't near a major. Yeah, those two events kind of carry a little bit of their own significance. So there are examples of that. But for me, the February events, the October events, they feel a little bit less significant and important and difficult. I find that motivation varies, participation varies a little bit more. So my two preferences or biases here are towards the Grand Slam season and health. Like health handicapping. And in that respect, I do kind of think Musetti deserves it more. Felix hadn't been having a good year at all until the U.S. Open, and he's made up a lot of ground, and it's been a phenomenal run. And I love the U.S. Open run, man. Like, I want to emphasize, I thought Felix's U.S. Open run was so credible. The level of tennis was awesome. He beat so many great players. The draw was not even particularly kind to him, and he still got through it all. And it's outdoor tennis, and it's best of 5. And I think that it was a remarkably deserving semifinal run by Felix. I also think that Felix is a way more threatening competitor at the ATP Finals. Way more. But I don't think that was the question. I don't think the question was who is most competitive in the competition of the ATP Finals, in which case the answer is Felix. If you're asking me who is more deserving of the recognition of you were one of the best 8 players in the world this year, so congratulations for that, I would say Lorenzo for me is just a bit more deserving in that respect. From member Ramya, Gill, what does your tennis calendar look like next year as a commentator, etc.? Are you covering any new tournaments that you didn't this year? Any new endeavors? Are you thinking of any changes to the format of your podcast? Any player guests on the pod, interviews, etc.? Wishing you the best. More power to you. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I can't say everything because I don't have a contract signed yet, but everything else is sort of in place and it's been agreed upon. I have a commentary gig lined up that will give people around the world more of a chance to hear me commentate on a tennis match. Well, not a tennis tournament, I should say. That's all I can say for now, but I know that because most of my work is on Tennis Channel, it is, the US viewers who may be able to tune in and hear me, whereas internationally, that opportunity is not there as often. And all I will say is there is something coming next year that will be more global. So there's that. I always take some time at the end of the year to figure out what do I want to sort of change or do better next year for the podcast. I'm not there yet. We are not at the end of the year yet, so I have not figured that out. From Roman, hi Gil, love the show. Just based on the eye test, are Alcaraz and Sinner playing at a higher level than the big 3 in their prime? Oh, you're trying to get me in trouble here. We're asking that question, the everybody gets outraged question. I'm going to sit on the fence a little bit. Look, there are some things that they're doing better than the big 3 in their prime. There are also a lot of things that they are doing worse. For example, Federer is a much better server than Alcaraz and Sinner. For example, Djokovic and Nadal are tougher defenders as far as court coverage and scrambling than Sinner. They are tougher defenders. They are both more consistent as far as balls in the court than Carlos Alcaraz. More disciplined than Carlos Alcaraz when it comes to keeping the ball in. Now, on the other side, Alcaraz combines brute force off the ground with finesse finishing, such as drop shots and net play, better than any of the prime big 3. I mean, Federer had the touch of Alcaraz, but he didn't have the artillery. I mean, he took time away and was so precise that it often didn't matter. But still, Federer was not going to hit as many winners from 5 feet behind the baseline as Alcaraz does. And Sinner is hitting harder than both of them, than all 3 of them as well. But Sinner isn't really sacrificing much consistency because he's barely missing, right? So, there are things that Sinner is doing better than prime big 3 also, which is, namely that. So I think that it's not an absurd comparison. Either way you want to make an argument, it's just different, right? There are things they're doing better. There are things they're doing worse. I think ultimately in the long run, everything is constantly being optimized and developing, slowly. So I do still hold the belief that tennis is getting better and better and better. If you're going to take that plop theory and just, pick people from other eras and just put them in a future era and see if they would win the match. I think most of the time they're still losing the match. I think this is close enough where you still have advantages for members of the big three. But man, I mean, it's just different. From Sports Fan. Hi, Gill. How can we analyze and assess Alcaraz's performance in indoor hard court throughout his career? He has been attributed as being one of the fastest learners on tour. However, he continues to have his worst losses during this part of the year. At the beginning of Paris, he said he felt good with the slower conditions, but during the match, he was complaining that the court was too slow. Do you believe his shortcomings are a mental issue, physical exhaustion, technical problem? How do you see him improving and making strides to make sure he doesn't follow a similar career path to that of someone like Rafa, who never won any Paris Masters or ATP Finals titles in his career? Thanks as always for the content. Yeah, he's been terrible in Paris. I think the mental side has been tough for him this time of year. He's said as much many times that exhaustion has set in, burnout has set in. I don't know if that was the case in 2025. I would like to point out in response to this question, he won Rotterdam, right? He had won the previous indoor hardcourt event that he'd played. I don't think that he is going to follow. I could be wrong. Let's see. Time will tell. I don't think he is going to follow a similar path as Nadal. I think that Rafa was hurt by low bouncing conditions and server/first strike friendly conditions. I don't think Alcaraz is as hurt by those conditions. I think he's far more adaptable to low bouncing conditions and offense friendly and server friendly conditions. There's more to his game that he can sort of impose himself in that kind of, in that setting under those conditions. So I think there can be some, look, who knows, also it gets in your head when it comes to the Paris Masters. He's been so brutal there that, the negativity and the lack of confidence can end up being an issue. But I think as we go through his career, things will stabilize a little bit, especially if he prioritizes it. And if he says, well, I want to be fresher this time of year, so maybe I might let some of my Davis Cup teammates carry the load after the U.S. Open. I might not play Laver Cup every year after the U.S. Open. I might just take care of myself a little bit more so that my preparation is better for this time of year. Like, there's some moves he could make. I don't know if it matters enough for him to do that kind of thing. We'll have to see. I think at a certain point, though, like once he, say, wins the career Grand Slam, which likely will come at some point, maybe that ATP Finals becomes a real chip for him. Something that he really wants to add to his trophy case. Could change the psychology a bit. I want to see things play out more because I don't think that Alcaraz is going to have a huge problem indoors for his whole career. From Matthew. Hey, Gil, what is your outlook for Zverev as the season winds down? Do you expect him to push for another major final next year or make any significant adjustment to his team, play style, or scheduling? Or do you expect him to be more passive and stick to the status quo? Appreciate your insights. Well, it'll be, I guess, interesting to see if he goes back to Mallorca this December, spend some more time with Uncle Tony, because remember, the door was left open for that option on both sides. I think Zverev showed some signs of decline this year. But I am not ready to declare it in my view, or I am not ready to take the stance that he is in decline just yet. But I will be keeping a close eye on the first half of 2026, where, some of these things need to be put in reverse, or else I will begin to believe that the best days of Zverev are in the rear view, particularly when it comes to just his body holding up. He was constantly dealing with stuff all year long. Issue here, issue there, issue everywhere. Okay? if that continues, that's not good, right? That usually gets worse before it gets better. There was some other stuff also, like I think he struggled a little bit more than usual against the top players compared to previous years. From VH, Gill, love your channel. Watch it weekly. Your thoughts on Carlos and Sinner playing an exhibition match in Seoul on the 10th of January, less than 48 hours before AO. How does that impact Carlos's preparation ahead of the AO? It doesn't sound good. What about Jannik's preparation? Are you a Carlos fan? You don't care about Jannik's prep? So you probably Googled when does the Australian Open start, and it told you January 12th, but that's actually the start of the qualies. That's not the start of the main draw. So Sinner and Alcaraz are going to play this exhibition, and then they're going to head to Australia, and then they're going to get the regular week prep ahead of the Australian Open. It won't be anything out of the ordinary for them. And obviously, they typically, neither of them play the Australian Open lead-ups. No United Cup, no Brisbane, no Adelaide. So it will be pretty much business as usual for Carlos and Jannik. They're just going to make this stop and play this exhibition. And, I'm assuming it will be a very exhibition-y exhibition. They're not going to want to show anything, especially off the heels of an off season. Like they're going to play this as if they're playing a practice set, if I were to guess. From member Master Hagel, you've well documented the general improvements in Sinner's serve. Do the data you can now examine show that he has improved his slice and kick serves? More generally, are there separate shot quality scores for different varieties of serves? For example, could we see Sinner's serve quality for all kick serves, all slice serves out wide, etc.? Can we see scores for each serve type and serve location? I'm especially interested to learn which players have the best second serve on tour. So Tennis Viz Insights, they do account for things like swing on a slice serve, how far is the ball moving laterally, on a kick serve, how high is it jumping? So those things are baked in, but it doesn't necessarily, I'm sure it could identify flat serve, slice serve, kick serve. Nowhere on my platform, nowhere on the Courtside Advantage platform can you sort or separate by serve type. You can look at second serve quality independent from first serve quality, and you can sort for second serve location. So if you give me a moment here, I will be able to sort of throw it up on the screen for everybody to see. Here we go. So I have filtered for Sinner's second serve and quality. And the blue numbers that you're seeing up top are what Sinner has done since the US Open. The orange numbers are what he does on average, and the black numbers are tour average. And basically, Sinner has not shown any tangible improvement on second serve quality since the US Open. And in general, Sinner's second serve quality is tour average. However, his second serve win percentage is the best on tour, number one. So you can kind of see, and by the way, to be exact, that number is 59%. And it's been 60% since the US Open. So unbelievable second serve win rate, but not because he's doing anything particularly special on the second serve itself. And I can go even deeper here. This won't be on your screen, but just to give you some raw numbers, tour average for second serve speed, that would be 98 miles per hour. Sinner is 97 miles per hour, and since the US Open, he's down to 96 miles per hour. Somewhat surprising indoors for him to actually be slower on second serve speed. Second serve's unreturned percentage. Tour average is 17%. Sinner sits at 18% usually, 17% since the US Open. So again, if you take the raw numbers when it comes to Sinner's second serve, he's just average. But then if you expand it and you go to what's happening in the points, he's killing it. He's absolutely crushing it. So it just goes to show you, what does it go to show you? What a great baseliner he is. Does that answer the question? Regardless, let's move on. I want to keep it moving. From Roberto. Hi, Gill. Thanks again. I think the fact that a player like Musetti might not make the finals, even with how well he's played, is a good example of how conditions on tour are too homogenous. Too many medium-fast hard courts and not enough clay and different variations of it, or grass. This, in turn, limits the diversity of playing styles we get to see at the tour finals. I'm going to cut you off right there because I'm trying to fly through these questions at this point. Yep. I mean, if you're going to be great on one surface, make it hard court because you can live off that. There are more points on offer on hard courts than the natural surfaces. So a player like Musetti, he's much better on clay and grass than he is on hard court. It definitely hurts a player like Musetti. There's no doubt about that. From Murph. Hi, Gil. Heard on another podcast that Andreeva didn't play Tokyo because she couldn't get a visa. Not because she was injured/tired, because even though she was granted a wild card, she wasn't granted a visa. It explains why she is playing doubles in the WTA finals. Is this true? And how often does this happen to Russian players these days or any other nationality of player? Is this something that should be discussed? Thanks for the content. Yeah, this was pretty crazy. Pretty wild to see for Andreeva. I've seen it happen to Dmitry Tursunov. He's had some visa issues trying to get out of Russia. I've seen it happen with Boris Becker, not from Russia. Obviously, that more has to do with that he's gotten into legal trouble at various points. Who else? And any other visa problems from Russia? I feel like there have been others. Why isn't it discussed? I mean, look, I don't know because none of us know anything about it, right? I don't know anything about getting a visa out of Russia into Japan. I know nothing about it. I don't think anybody is really well positioned to talk about the particulars, but it's odd and it's unfortunate given how important that potentially could have been for Andreeva. From Nabawa. Can you comment on tennis coverage regarding camera angles? Which camera angles do you like and why? Do you think tennis can improve as a product if better angles were tested? Yeah. I mean, the interesting question is that low camera angle that everybody goes goo goo gaga for. Not saying that I don't. I like it too. But somebody has to focus group the level of fatigue factor that could exist with that angle. Do we love it because we suddenly feel closer and lower down and now we're like, oh, this is so amazing. But what if we stayed there for a whole match? Would we get sick of it? Would we lose too much fidelity when it comes to what's happening on the other side of the court and some of the sort of larger context that you can see from the wider and higher up angle? I don't know. Like, to me, I always feel like there's a sweet spot. I do think, I could be wrong. Like, I wish it were studied. I do think if you stayed on that lower angle the whole time, you'd get tired of it. But it should be kind of properly and scientifically tested, in my opinion. From member Orchard Blue, Hi, Gill. With the Paris title, Sinner is on a 26-match win streak on indoor hard court, surpassing Sampras's 25. It's now the 5th longest all time. What about his game makes him so good indoors? It just accentuates what he's good at. Just the purity of the ball striking, his ability to go after the ball and time the ball. It allows him to play his power ground game with the highest level of confidence and precision. So anything that sort of helps a player who's utilizing a lot of firepower be more consistent, the indoor conditions generally helps that player. Not that Sinner can't be consistent outdoors, but I think he can fully put the pedal to the metal, maybe change direction down the line a little bit more often, maybe push the pace a little bit more than even he normally does when he's indoors in that ball striking, and the consistency holds up. From Mr. Paralysis. Hey, Gill, I noticed the match between Popyrin and Bublik. Bublik decided not to give Popyrin a handshake at the end. I believe this was because Popyrin did not put his hand up to apologize for getting 2 fortunate bounces after hitting the net twice on an important point. Do you think this reaction was justified? How do you feel about these unspoken rules in general? I feel like an acknowledgement that you got lucky is appropriate. I don't think an apology is actually an apology. You're not sorry necessarily. But I think just to say like, I got lucky, like I'm going to let everybody know I got lucky. And I'm going to let my opponent know, hey, I acknowledge it. I get it. Sorry that happened to you, but happy it happened to me, if you know what I mean. So like when I play tennis, I apologize when I get lucky. I don't know. Not a big deal. I'm on board with it as an overall practice. I also think it's like a small look when you're making a really big deal out of being mad that your opponent doesn't do it. I think it's something that isn't so important where you should be not saying that Bublik threw a temper tantrum, but just to get my point across, I don't think it's worth a temper tantrum. All right. Somebody's asking about Opelka in Paris, where he gave a walkover and then he ended up getting a lucky loser spot. They should fix that rule. That should never happen. Let's do one more. This is from Gabamini. Hi, Gil. I wanted to ask about the shot quality metrics that are becoming more common in tennis analysis. I recently saw a graphic showing that Musetti has the 3rd best forehand on tour, which surprised me. To me, it feels like shot quality places too much emphasis on consistency rather than how damaging a shot is. For instance, I'd argue that guys like Berrettini, Ruud, or Auger-Aliassime have better forehands, but since the system seems to reward not missing more than doing damage, that isn't always reflected accurately. I also wonder whether athleticism is inflating some players' shot quality scores. Musetti's forehands on the run, as an example, can look more effective because of his speed and movement rather than purely his stroke mechanics. It might make sense for future versions of these models to measure athleticism as a separate factor rather than letting it influence shot quality, and to slightly reduce the weighted placed on consistency. Well, this is a great observation. First off, let's go through the leaderboard of forehand shot quality so that we can kind of test your theory. And we can kind of look at how much consistency is weighted versus weaponry. Sinner's number 1, Djokovic is number 2, Musetti's number 3, and Alcaraz is number 4. So right away, you can see that Alcaraz being number 4, despite having the scariest, like most offensively special forehand weapon on tour. I don't know if if he hits a drop shot, does that factor into forehand quality? I don't know about that. Anyway, whereas Djokovic usually is way, way, way up there in terms of consistency, and I would venture to say Musetti as well. And by the way, shot quality does measure from when you're in defensive positions, do you make the ball in the court, and with what kind of quality can you make the ball in the court? So Djokovic and Musetti, as this commenter points out, when they are absorbing quality into their forehand wing, they are so good at avoiding the error and getting the ball back deep to extend the point and stay neutral. Tsitsipas is 5th. Basilashvili is 6th. There's some more offensively minded forehands. Cerundolo 7th. Great forehand. Fils is 8th. Again, that's an offensive-minded forehand. Fils usually is not one of the more consistent forehands. Zverev is 9th. He was higher last year, if I remember correctly. So you see Zverev as a top 10 forehand, even though obviously it's seen around the locker room as a weakness. But remember, it doesn't take pressure into account. All points, all forehands created equal. And it's rewarding consistency. Jerry Shang at 10, Fritz at 11, Bautista Agut at 12, Dimitrov at 13, Monfils at 14. Okay, so I'll say two things. Rude, by the way, is 15, which is surprisingly low for Casper and his forehand. But I'd make 2 points. First off, you do have a decent mix here of consistent forehands and aggressive forehands, ultra damaging forehands. You do get both, which is good. It shows you that the metric is not way off to one side or the other, that you can excel in forehand quality either way. The other thing that I would then ask, kind of playing devil's advocate, not that I necessarily disagree with you, because if I made my forehand rankings, I would also have some of these guys who you mentioned higher. Berrettini comes in at 19th. But again, like defensively, it's not there. Felix comes in at 27th. It's probably because of like lacking in defense and consistency mainly. That's where that's probably suffering. I'd love to kind of get into it a little bit more, maybe with Tom Corey sometime. But so I mainly agree with you. However, could it be that we have it wrong and they have it right? Because as we talked about earlier in the podcast, offense is sexier, but it's not always more effective. And maybe our eye test is actually too biased the other direction. That is very possible, because if we're going to be biased one direction, it's going to be that direction. It's going to be, I want the forehand that produces winners. I want the forehand that produces high RPM, high speed. That's what I'm talking about. How you weight these things is definitely where you end up getting some subjectivity in these quality metrics. It's why I always prefer, I like to use them, but I also love to see the raw numbers behind it. And, that's why I'm always going to use a lot of the tangible things that we can see, such as, just as one example, something like average speed or percent in. I think quality is valuable to look at, and in some ways it's more advanced than those numbers that are one-dimensional, but it's also good to look at some of the raw stuff that is completely and fully objective. All right? It's been fun. I will see you again before the end of this week with an ATP Finals preview. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.